Good morning. I'm Dick Wagner. Welcome to the Crest Network regular Tuesday morning webinar. It is a beautiful day here in Southwest Florida. Going to be 80 degrees today, so all of you up in the miserable cold north, I hope you're still shivering. We're going to talk today about ultra-high sales performers. What I'm really hoping that you will take away from this is some skills for leveraging the emotional intelligence that it takes to be an ultra high sales performer. People always buy for their own reasons. They never buy for your reasons, unless, of course, your reasons are perfectly matched with theirs. Average salespeople conform to the standard expected buyer scripts. Average salespeople routinely think that buyers make logical, rational decisions about their purchases. And so average salespeople try to use their own personal emotion to sell whatever it is they're selling. The fact of the matter is that buyers today have incredible control, incredible power. They have more tools available to them, and in the sales process, there is more at stake. In almost any region of the country, there are, in the restoration world, 10, 20, 30, 50, 100 competitors in the same market that you're in. If you're here in Central or South Florida, there are hundreds upon hundreds of contractors in your market that you're competing with. And so you do have more at stake in trying to make that happen. The fact is, ultra high sales performers are very aware of the emotional experience that buyer needs and that buyer wants, that buyer expects. Ultra high sales performers know that emotion is the critical factor involved in the selling process. And just for purposes of clarification, I'm interchanging salesperson with marketer pretty regularly throughout the presentation. So although most of you watching really aren't technically a salesperson, unless you're out there actually getting the contract signed on the dotted line, most of you are acting in the form of, or in the role of a marketer. And so in today's market, there are big differences between competitors. And that's what consumers think. And I misspoke on that. There are rarely huge differences between competitors. The fact is that if you looked at every single competitor's website in your market, if you looked at all of the literature and brochures and marketing materials that your competitors are producing and laid them all out on a table, the vast majority, I mean 99 out of 100 brochures or marketing materials would say the same thing. Y'all do fire, water, smoke, and mold. At least that's what the consumer thinks, is that you're all the same. And so the company that purchases from you, or the company that chooses to do business with you, does business based on the emotion that you can generate. It's really crucial that you understand the emotional aspect. The average salesperson constantly is trying to sell from a position of logic. An example of that is the average salesperson, if they'll even do their homework about a prospect, will go in and try to sell them on the concept of, we do this for you, the product or the service does that for you. Uh, it helps you in this regard and that regard, and it's all comes from the foundation of logic. But yet we have not realized, the vast majority of the marketers out there have not realized that customers buy based on emotion, and then they shift to logic. And oddly enough, they shift to logic after they've made the purchase, after they've made the decision to buy. And then it's the logic of rationale. They use rationale in their head to say, oh, yeah, that made really good sense. But that's after the decision has been made. Your buyer has a typical expectation, or a typical vision, or a typical standard that they think of all salespeople. And I'm here to tell you, the typical buyer does not have a very high expectation of a salesperson. The fact is that ultra high performers, these top salespeople, know how to disrupt that buyer's expectations. They know how to change the game. One of the absolute best ways to change the game is in your initial dealing with the gatekeeper. That's where it starts. And it's specifically referred to as flipping the buyer script. You see, your buyer, let's take the gatekeeper, for example. That gatekeeper is anticipating that you're a salesperson, and they're anticipating when you ask for Mr. So-and-so or Mrs. So-and-so, they're anticipating, they're expecting, they believe you're a salesperson. And that gatekeeper knows that they're expected by their boss to stop you from getting by. They're throwing up the gate. And so it's really important for you to flip the buyer script. In this webinar, we don't have the time, the luxury to expand on what flipping the buyer script might look like. But in the next week or two, we will have, under the videos section on the Crest Network's website, we will have a 8 or 10 or 12-minute video on how to flip the buyer script. It's almost ready to be recorded, so watch for it in the next couple weeks. Ultra high sales performers know how to pull the buyer to them. And I'm not talking about reaching out and grabbing them by the chest and yanking them to you. I'm talking about emotionally bringing them to you. I'm talking about changing the buyer-seller game. You see, it's often perceived that it is a game, and the buyer, or let's use the words gatekeeper, have a strategy to prevent the sale from happening, and the ultra high sales performer has the strategy on knowing how to circumvent that, how to flip that script, how to get that buyer to emotionally want to work with them or do business with them. The fact is that most buyers tune out salespeople. They just, their eyes gloss over, their ears plug shut, and they just tune them out. They don't hear them. They don't want to hear them. They don't have time to hear them. It's been said by many different surveys around the country that the typical insurance agency has as many as 15 visitors per day coming into their office that are sales and marketing people. 15 a day. And so the gatekeeper, that front desk person, or the principal themselves tend to tune out salespeople. And so your goal is to disrupt what they expect will be your standard response. You need to emotionally pull them toward you. You need to make them become more engaged with what you're selling, what you're offering, what you want to talk about. It does indeed lower buyers' expectations or buyers' barriers when you know how to draw on their emotion. Ultra high sales performers routinely follow the win probability rule. It's very, very simple. Think about this. Would you play a slot machine in Vegas that paid out 95%, because that's what an awful lot of them do? So for every $100 you put in, you're probably only going to get 95 back. Or would you play one that's only going to return $35 back? Nobody listening to this webinar is going to want to put $100 in a slot machine knowing full well that they're only going to get 35% out of it. So ultra high sales performers follow that win probability rule, and that includes, and here is a big part of that, it's the pre-qualification process. I'm currently reading, and actually I'm working with a number of my clients right now, almost as if it's a book review every couple weeks. We're reading Fanatical Prospecting by Jeb Blount. And one of the things that Jeb hammers on is doing pre-qualification of your prospects. It's kind of like, and let's go back to this point, it's kind of like, well, you have the likelihood of calling on salespeople that are able to generate 95% of your sales, or you can call on a whole bunch of clients that are only going to generate 35% of your sales. So ultra high sales performers, they prospect fanatically. They live it, eat it, breathe it, sleep it. They are, every morning they're waking up thinking about it. They're looking for prospects at the gas station. They're looking for prospects at the restaurant, in the line at Wendy's or McDonald's. I know of one particular marketer who is on this webinar that is constantly, based on her daily activity reports, commenting that she saw a plumbing truck and she essentially chased it down the road and followed them into the Home Depot parking lot and got out and interrupted them and introduced herself. That's fanatical prospecting. That pays off huge dividends down the road. Also, ultra high sales performers meticulously qualify their prospect. It goes right back to that slot machine concept. Do you want to call on prospects that only 35 out of 100 can produce anything for you? Or do you want to call on prospects where you've vetted them, you've verified the legitimacy, their capability of referring you, and you have a dramatically higher likelihood of doing business with them? Use emotion as their friend. Use emotion to draw them toward you, to have them feel good about you, to have them feel good about what you're offering, and at the same time, feel good about themselves that they're making the right decision. I encourage you to go and buy and read the book Fanatical Prospecting. I'm on my third time through reading it. The second and third time, I'm sitting reading it with a highlighter, different colored highlighters. And I learned something new on every single read through. I encourage all of you to read that book. Well, let's move to the next slide here, if we can make it work. I want to clarify this as well. I interview and talk with a lot of marketers. I interview marketers in anticipation of being hired. I work with marketers who are coming on board or are on board, and I ask them what they're trying to achieve when they're out in the marketplace. And so many times they will say, well, yeah, it's about relationships and it's about making friends. Well, I'm going to tell you, it's not about making friends. Will you make some friends? Yep, absolutely. Should you make friends? Absolutely. Should you build deep relationships where possible? Again, absolutely. But I can tell you that your clients, your prospects, are not actively looking for friends. No sales agent, no plumber, no insurance agent, no hotel manager wakes up in the morning and heads to work saying, oh boy, I sure hope we can make friends today with a bunch of new people. It just does not happen. That is not logical. That's not practical. Nobody's looking to make new friends. If it happens, wonderful. But if you have 200 really good prospects that you're calling on regularly, you'll be lucky to make real friendships with more than 2 or 3, 4, a handful. That's pretty common maybe, but that's about the max. Nobody's out there striving to make friends. Ultra high sales performers are focused on different things. Ultra high sales performers actively put themselves in the shoes of the buyer. They view things from the buyer's perspective. Think about this. You're calling on an insurance agent. How good are you at thinking of yourself as the insurance agent? How good are you at putting yourself in their shoes? Putting the emotion into the relationship, into the interaction, even the initial sales call. How good are you at understanding exactly where they're coming from. And maybe where they're coming from is real easy. Maybe where they're coming from is, I am in a lousy mood today. I don't want to talk to people. I certainly don't want to talk to sales and marketing people. Leave me alone. And guess what? They're going to show you and they're going to treat you that way. So ultra high sales performers tune in to the emotions of that prospect. They use the intellect and they use empathy to understand where that prospect is at that particular moment, mentally, emotionally. Ultra high salespeople are also very self-aware. Ultra high sales performers are really good at accurately understanding and interpreting what their own emotions are at any given moment. Ultra high sales performers know that, and they're honest with themselves. They understand that they themselves have emotional blind spots. We all have emotional blind spots. How many of us have an emotional blind spot when we see a kid walking down the street and his pants are halfway down around his knees? We instantly have a stereotype in our mind. We instantly have an emotional blind spot. I'm going to go out on a limb here. Hey, maybe the guy's pants were falling down because he couldn't afford a belt. Now, I know we're going way off on a limb here, but we all have emotional blind spots. Some of us see a cop car sitting with radar. We instantly have a perception. It's just like the blind spot in our vehicle. We're driving down the road. It's happened to every one of us. We want to change lanes or we drift out of our own lane and a car honks at us because we were driving with a blind spot and didn't realize a car was coming up beside us. We all have emotional blind spots. The better we are at recognizing them and admitting them and dealing with them, and that leads to being honest with ourselves about our own strengths and our own weaknesses. That's how we elevate ourselves to be an ultra high sales performer. We need to also be very aware of our own disruptive emotions. And what might those be? Real easy. The gatekeeper is a rude, nasty, well, I won't use that word, but they're rude and nasty. And we instantly, our disruptive emotions, we immediately get mad. We get disgusted. We tend to maybe even be just a bit curt or snippy back to them. That's allowing our own disruptive emotions to damage the possibilities. That's not what an ultra high sales performer does. They're very aware and in tune to their own disruptive emotions, and they use ways, they have triggers that help them prevent those disruptive emotions from manifesting themselves. When you walk in to visit a prospect, they're evaluating you. It's been said that they're running through their head as many as 8 different criteria or evaluations to decide whether they want to talk with you any further, or they want to do business with you, whether they like you, whether they're even going to be interested at all. And I'm going to quickly go down through these 8. First and foremost, when you walk in the door, They're evaluating you as to whether they trust you. And you might say, how can they possibly know that if they haven't even heard me talk yet? All they do is they saw me walk in the door. I assure you, they are evaluating whether they trust you by the way you're dressed, by the look on your face, by how you carry yourself, your comportment, your how you stand, how you walk, whether or not you're carrying a briefcase with you or a portfolio. They're evaluating whether they trust you. They're also trying to determine very quickly if you seem likable. And that might be from the minute you open your mouth. Did you walk in with a smile on your face? Do they think you care about them? Do they see you as a good listener? When you ask them a question, do you shut up and listen? Most people, it has been said, when they ask a question and the other person is answering it, the person that asked the question is just busy thinking of what their response or their retort is going to be. They're not really hearing what the speaker is saying. They're just angling in their mind for how they're going to respond back. That's not being a good listener. Do you offer value? That's what they're considering. Or do they feel that you're trying to take value? Another really important one is your approach and the offer that you have in front of you, different and unique. What strengths do you demonstrate? Do they believe that you're genuine? These are the kinds of things that every prospect, every plumber, every customer service rep at the front desk, every insurance agent, every front desk person at a hotel, or the receptionist at a nursing home, these prospects are evaluating you on these 8 things. I would encourage you to either go back and review this and write them down, or take a screenshot of this particular slide and then post it and keep it with you. And remember to think about all of these things when you're walking in to a client's office. Sales drive is extremely important. Sales drive beats talent, it beats experience, it beats education, it beats skills, and it beats techniques. And I'm going to interpret sales drive to mean attitude. We're interviewing right now for a couple clients to hire marketers, and I have repeatedly said, I'm not worried about whether they know about fire, water, smoke, and mold. I'm not worried about whether they understand the insurance claims process. That's all teachable. What I'm worried about is, do they have sales drive? Are they motivated? Do they have the right attitude? These are the critical 5 points that aren't critical if you have the right attitude. It's important to be optimistic and positive. When you believe that everything happens for a reason, guess what? Negative events become more positive. They become more optimistic. When you believe that you are essentially in control of your own destiny, when that happens, you no longer fear failure and rejection. The number one reason why sales and marketing people struggle is because they do, and they don't want to get on the phone and talk to somebody on the phone. They even, I have had marketers that said they sat in their car and cried before they went in to make a sales call because they were so scared The reason they were scared is because they feared rejection. If you believe you're in control of your own destiny, you're not going to fear that rejection, or certainly not anywhere near as much. You're not defined by what happens to you. In other words, if they tell you no, that doesn't define you. That hasn't labeled you as a failure. What labels you as a failure is how you deal, or if you deal improperly with what happens. In other words, when they tell you no, if you deal with that as, okay, that's one more no, so I'm one step closer to a yes. When you deal with it in that way, you're going to be in a positive attitude much more of the time. And yes, all of us, me, you, all of us have setbacks. Our level of mental toughness affects our high enthusiasm. It affects self-confidence, attention control. If we have great mental toughness, it can minimize negative energy. And we all know that negative energy is almost like a death spiral. The stronger we are, the better our good mental attitude is. Also, I added this in here because so many people don't necessarily think about this. The last bullet point, quality of our intel, or the quality of our research or our homework. So many times marketers have a list of 100 plumbers, 200 insurance agents, 200 hotels on a list, and they don't take the time to do the research and the homework and the intel to know information, not only about the specific client or the specific client's business, but of the client's industry. If you're calling on plumbers, you ought to know about plumbing. I don't mean that you know how to change a faucet or replace a toilet or plumb a house, but you ought to have some broad understanding of the concepts of plumbing. And one of the great ways to do that is to subscribe to plumbing industry magazines. Mark that you're a consultant in that particular industry. You will likely get the subscription for free. You get a magazine every month. Read it through from cover to cover. Just getting familiar with brand names and terminologies and words really changes your understanding of that particular industry. And I'm not talking just plumbing. I'm talking insurance. I'm subscribed to the Insurance Journal and subscribe to the Claims Journal. Subscribe to the hotel industry magazines. They are extremely valuable. Average salespeople's wing their sales calls. In other words, they have no plans. They don't have a script in mind. They don't have a specific plan for exactly what they're going to say when they walk in. And that's a terrible mistake. What do I know about this prospect is one of the key questions that every marketer should ask themselves and then have an answer. What do I want to know about this prospect? What is my call objective when I'm calling on this project or a prospect? And then number 4, and this is many of them do 1, 2, and 3, but then they fail to do number 4, and that is, What's my targeted next step? After I've gone in there, after I've interacted with them, what is the next step? You often, this is average salespeople, they're just winging it. So they're kind of floating along, and depending on how the call goes or the visit goes, they may choose to ask which question they want to ask on the fly without any forethought. You have to absolutely know what, if this is the end result of that conversation, then you need to know exactly what the next step is. And ultra high sales performers have self-control. Strategies that let self-control take over are as follows. And I would refer to those, and I'm stealing a concept from a book I read 6 months or a year ago about the strategy of self-control is having, it's been referred to as a shelf or a ledge, where you step on the shelf or you step on the ledge for a brief moment to give yourself, your emotions, time to get under control. And so there are 5 different sayings or phrases that you can use to help you get on that ledge and stall while your self-control is, or while your emotions are getting under self-control. Number 1, that's interesting. Why is that important to you? That's a question to ask your prospect. They tell you, nope, not interested, don't care about that, we're in good shape. I know me, and I would immediately want to reach out and punch him in the face. Don't be such a jerk. Well, you can't do that, obviously. So a way to get your emotions under control is to say something like, that's interesting. Why is that important to you? It's kind of like a stall factor, but it's a valid enough question that it gives you 5, 10, 15, 20 seconds to get your emotions under control while they're coming up with their answer. Or you could say, how have you handled that in the past? What a great way to get them engaged and buy yourself time. Or something as simple as, would you tell me more? That's really unusual or interesting. Could you walk me through that? And then last but not least, just to be sure I understand, could you elaborate a little bit more? I like this one when the client says, we've been really, really busy. Busy is a very relative term. What's busy to Jennifer isn't the same level of busy as it is to Dave. Hi, guys. And just to be sure I understand, could you elaborate a little bit more? When they say, I'm really busy, it's very fair to say, just to be sure I understand, could you elaborate more? Because you really don't know what they mean by being busy. Are they personally busy because they're dealing with a sick mother or a house full of sick children? Or are they really busy because the business has been slammed and nonstop for hours, days, or weeks? And so while they're putting you off and you're gaining some control of your emotions, ask them a clarifying question, just to be sure I understand. Could you elaborate a little more on what you mean by busy? The more you exercise self-control, it's kind of like a muscle. The stronger it gets, and then these kinds of responses become instinctive. Be real careful about the potential death spiral. One of the biggest situations that cause a death spiral is the marketer being so competitive beyond the pale that they end up causing themselves overconfidence. And when they get overconfident, it's real easy to slip into arrogance. And that's deadly. Average salespeople hold on to and they hope that they can turn the prospect around even after that prospect or that client stalls and stalls and stalls. I really encourage you to ditch prospects that you feel are low probability sales. The example that I'm going to give, and I can see by the whole list of those that are on this webinar, I'm going to use an example of somebody that's not on this webinar so they won't feel singled out. But I sat with a marketer and asked them a while back how many insurance agents they called on every month, because they told me their route is a once a month visit. And this person told me 240. They call on 240 insurance agents. How long have you been calling on those 240? The answer was 4 years. Then I asked the fateful question, of those 240, how many of those insurance agents have referred a job to you in the past 12 or even 18 months? There was a long hesitation, hemming and hawing, considering it, thinking about the answer. The ultimate answer was finally maybe 20. So I immediately said, okay, in the past year and a half, 20 of those 240 insurance agents have referred jobs to you. Why are you calling on the other 220? And the answer was, because I'm hoping that I can turn them around. Ladies and gentlemen, you are not going to turn them around after 4 years. Can you convert one out of the 220? Sure, maybe. But the probability is so low that you're wasting valuable time. Pare it down to 30 or 40 and give great personalized service to the ones that are referring you. And you will find that the only thing that changes, your sales won't drop off because they weren't giving you work anyway. But what changes is you suddenly have more time available to devote to legitimate high probability prospects or expand your prospect opportunities into other areas. Be careful of the death spiral. Why do deals fall through? Oddly enough, and this has been tested over and over and over, 90% is the failure of the marketer to ask what the next step or the next prospect is. Cardinal rule, never, ever leave a meeting without setting and getting a firm next step. Don't ever end any meeting. Vagueness of times or promises of, yeah, check with me next week, or hey, why don't you give me 2 weeks to kick it around and check back with me in 2 weeks. That is not getting a firm next step. That's vague. Chances are more than 99% that they're just trying to ditch you. They're trying to unload you. It's up to you to keep that sale moving and moving forward. It is not the responsibility of your prospect. So when they say, check back with me in 2 weeks, grab your phone, look at your calendar and say, all right, in 2 weeks, on March 18th, I'll be back in this area. How does 10 o'clock in the morning on March 18th work for you? And if they say, yeah, that sounds good, great, I'll send you an appointment invite and it's a date. We'll see you then. That's locking it down. That's getting a firm commitment. Does that mean that they will keep the appointment every single time? No, it does not. But you have a far greater likelihood if you follow through with the appropriate next step. And let's try to move to the next slide. Sometimes the cursor doesn't want to go. Overcoming their objection or their stall. I talked about this earlier about using that shelf or ledge strategy, using it to help you control your emotions when you feel like you're angry or disgusted or you want to punch them in the nose, but using that same shelf strategy to help you stay on track and to buy yourself time while you're thinking of the appropriate response. And so shelf statements like, that's why I asked that question. Well, that makes perfect sense to me, or many of my clients felt the exact same way initially. Or that's fantastic. Or how so? Could you clarify for me? All of these kinds of statements effectively buy you time. Keep a shelf concept or a shelf strategy always at your fingertips to keep your emotions in check or to buy yourself time to, because, as good as we are and we can think on our feet and we have great answers and retorts, not always do we have the perfect one. And when you use these shelf strategies, it gives you the ability to buy 5 seconds or 10 seconds. And those 5 or 10 seconds can be extremely valuable to you. And then part of that death spiral, 3 words that you should never, ever use in the sales and marketing process. And I have them in quotes. Hi, this is Dick Wagner. I'm just checking in. That's a loser response. That's a loser introduction. It's wasted. It's not believable. It's not plausible. It's not credible. It's just silly. Nobody believes you're just checking in. Hi, I'm just checking in. How you doing today? Everything good? How you feeling? Kids okay? Husband treating you right? Great. Okay, see you later. Bye-bye. That's what just checking in is. And it's silly. It's passive. It's pathetic. It assumes automatically right out of the gate that you're going to lose. It assumes that they're not going to give you anything of encouragement. It absolutely does not enhance or move forward in the process of selling your product or your service. Deals don't happen by calling and saying, hi, I'm just checking in. It's silly. It's bogus. Know your audience. Too many of us have a list of 10 or 20 or 30 or 50 or 200 insurance agents or 100 plumbers on their list and don't have notes and details about the buyer's motivations. Each buyer's motivation is different. The marketer often doesn't know what the buyer's personal risk might be in doing business. Maybe the buyer is completely against the relationship. You better ask and you better listen. You need to know what their emotional hot buttons are and understand that the emotional hot buttons of one plumber is different than the emotional hot buttons of another plumber. The emotional hot buttons of the director of a nursing home, of one particular nursing home, is going to be different than the emotions or emotional hot buttons of any other nursing home director. You should absolutely know how to speak their language. Nobody outside of our industry knows what a DHU is. We do. We better know what their language is. If attended any of my classes, you know that when I talk about hotels, you can say it with me. Heads in beds. It's part of their language. You should know with every individual prospect what makes that particular prospect feel important. What's their risk if they choose someone else? You ought to know what their risk is if they decide to go with another restoration company instead of you. Why should they advocate for you? Why should they advocate for your company? You ought to know those reasons. If you know those reasons, you can talk intelligently with and interact with them, and you can then become an ultra-high sales professional. Once again, my mouse isn't moving here. Average salespeople dive right into the sale by selling. They're pitching the minute they open their mouth. Why do they do it? Because they fear the unknown. They don't know enough about their prospect. They don't know their prospect's pains. They don't know how their prospect is thinking, what their hot buttons are. And so the salesperson dominates the conversation. Why are they doing that? Because they're trying to control the prospect. Because they believe that if they can control the prospect, that they can steer that prospect to actually having a sale. Also, salespeople, average salespeople, people that have not done their intel, hate silence. And so they tend to fill it with wasted garbage talk. Average salespeople are impatient. They don't want to go through the 5 or 6 or 7 or 8 steps of the sales process. And yes, sometimes it doesn't have to be 8 steps. Sometimes it can be shortened to 4 or 5. Sometimes multiple steps are merged together, but there are still steps in the process. And average salespeople will just get impatient. And they don't want to take the time to go through each step. And last, average salespeople want to feel significant. They want to feel important. They want to dominate the conversation, so they tend to not let the prospect talk because they fear if the prospect talks too much, they won't know how to respond. And then they'll get shut out of a possible sale. The best way to develop your own self-discipline is to shut out everything around you, everything in your head, except that prospect. Ultra high sales performers, on the other hand, are patient. They know early objections often go away. They go away quickly. Usually, what's one of the early objections? Hey, I'm really too busy right now. Your response, or the response of an ultra high sales performer is, hey, I absolutely understand that. I expected you to be very, very busy. That's why I just wanted to schedule a time with you when I can spend 10 minutes or 12 minutes when you wouldn't be quite so busy. Boy, when you say that to them, that throws them off their game and it puts you back in control because you just flipped the script. They know that more buyers talk about themselves, and when you're not, they feel more connected to you. And this makes the buyer feel important. It helps in the buyer volunteering, giving you the right information. It helps in the qualifying process. And to differentiate yourself and your company, you absolutely have to be different. For heaven's sakes, why aren't you different? I said you probably in some markets here in South Florida, there might be 200 restoration contractors within a given territory. When you speak your client's language, when you sound different from your competitors and you gain influence over the buyer, now you're different. Now you're speaking their lingo and their jargon that puts you in their shoes. Remember, memorable stories that they can relate to are powerful. When you fail to ask, you fail. Simple, straightforward. When you fail to ask, you are failing as a marketing rep. Quit trying to close the sale and focus on asking. Ask for the appointment. Ask for the next step. Ask for the information that you need. Talk to the decision maker. Call them by their first name. And only then can you get to an appropriate point to ask them to refer a job to you. Average salespeople are afraid to ask. Why? Because they're afraid of the very likely rejection that they're going to get. It takes a lot of emotional control. Use that ledge, because so many salespeople, keep in mind, you're asking for the client's time. And no client likes to give up their time easily. So don't be afraid to ask for their time. Don't be afraid to ask for the next step. And don't be afraid to ask or move higher up the management ladder. The reason most people don't buy is because they're cool with whatever they're doing now. And that might be nothing. They might not be referring anybody on a loss. That's what's called status quo. It's whatever they're doing right now. And so they throw those objections at you because they don't want to change status quo. They don't want to have to do any new changes to their routine. They don't want to refer you because they don't know what the risks are. They don't see the value in your proposal. The failure there is on you, not on them. Or they don't trust or believe you. Once again, the failure is on you. Humans tend to be attracted to safe choices, and almost always they believe that salespeople are not safe choices. Interesting that since about 2012, in the past 8 to 10 years, there's been a new psychology of selling that's become very highly effective. You have hopefully learned what it takes, what makes the difference between an ultra high performer and an average performer. So let's wrap this up by recapping average sales performers, and the next slide will be ultra high sales performers. Average sales performers use generic buyer scripts. They don't tailor it to your specific client. They wing the sales process. They have not established any repeatable process. They fail to do any research or learn about their prospect. They start pitching right out of the gate, running their mouth, talking rather than listening. They're afraid to ask many and deep questions. They usually start with rational instead of emotional, and then try to hopefully flip ultimately the other way. They focus on features and benefits. It isn't about features and benefits. Or that's all about, I got to make friends. I got to make friends. If I can make friends with them, they'll do business with me. Baloney. People don't come to work every day hoping that the salesperson walking in the door will become their friend. On the contrast, ultra high sales performers, they use the emotional strategy to connect with their buyer. They know how to disrupt the buyer's script. The buyer says, geez, I'm really busy right now. They expect the salesperson to say, oh, yeah, okay, sorry to bother you. The way you disrupt or flip the script is to say, yep, I anticipated that. I'm not surprised that John is really busy. So why I'm stopping in is to schedule an appointment where I can spend 10 minutes of Bob's time or Joe's time or whatever. That's disrupting the buyer script. Ultra high sales performers prospect fanatically from the moment their feet land on the floor beside their bed until the moment their feet get up into bed. And some of you on here are going to say, oh, holy crap, really? I have a life. Well, maybe this is not the right life for you as a marketer if you're not going to prospect fanatically. Follow the win probability rule. In short, that means qualify your prospect and eliminate those prospects that have a low probability of becoming a client. Put yourselves in the buyer's shoes with appropriate empathy. Know what your client's blind spots are and know what your own disruptive emotions are. Know how to get a commitment to the next step in the marketing process. Be very patient. That's an ultra high sales performer. And know how to be unique and how to be different. Ladies and gentlemen, which one are you? Which one are you going to be? Which one do you want to be? I'm hoping you want to be an ultra high sales performer. Thanks for watching. I'm Dick Wagner. This has been a long webinar, but I appreciate all of you hanging in with me. Talk to you next time.